friend, to this session of design patterns. In this session, we will try to implement one of the most important pattern, facade pattern. I think this pattern has been used unknowingly so many times in the project, that even we are not aware of. But a very important pattern. But if you know this pattern probably, then what you can do is basically when you are implementing the facade pattern unknowingly, by knowing facade pattern, you can probably make the architecture more better, because you can build a more simplified interface. We'll come to what facade pattern is all about. So again, fundamentals as usual, they fall into the structural pattern categories. They actually help us to unite subsystems or consolidate subsystems in a common communication platform. Means in the sense you have two or three subsystems. Facade pattern helps us to unite these subsystems in a unified manner, so that they can communicate in a unified manner. What it means, for example, here's a simple example of it. We have three classes: CLS product, which helps us to get details of a product; CLS payment, which helps us to pay online; CLS invoice, which helps us to print an invoice. Now what we need to do is that we need to place an order. So here's, we need to place an order. But in order to place an order, what you have to do is that you need to create an object of CLS product, get details, display to the user. Then after that, you need to use the payment object, make the payment online. Then you need to use the invoice object and print the invoice. You need to use these three objects in a manner and accomplish this place order. So as said previously, facade will stand on this top of this subsystem and do this for you. Okay, so it's an extra class. Facade is nothing but it's an extra class which you create, and you aggregate all these classes to achieve that functionality. So here's the actual code implementation of it. Here's a CLS product, which returns you a product information. Here's a payment, which will do a payment online. I have not implemented anything, it's just for the demo purpose. Here's an invoice, which prints your invoice. So what you do is that you basically create object of product. This is a facade, okay, which is nothing but it's a unification of all these three objects, three classes. So create a product class, create a payment, create an invoice, get the details, display to the user, pay online, print invoice. So you can say, facade is all about consolidating and achieving some kind of functionality by aggregating the objects. So here's the source code of it, the same thing which I've shown in the snippet. Here's your CLS product, which gets the details, CLS payment, CLS invoice, and here's your facade. And here's the CLS order, which actually is your facade. And here's the place order functionality, which is achieved by creating objects of all these three classes and calling them appropriately. So the class now, rather than getting the UI, the UI of the project, rather than interacting with each of them separately, it will just call this one system, which will actually interact with all these subsystems, between all these subsystems, and make the functionality more simplified. So whenever you see that that unknowingly you are using a facade, try to see that how you can make the interface more simplified. Because with facade, what happens is you are exposing a simplified interface to the UI, and the facade takes up all those all the orchestration part, I will say, rather, means creating that object, doing this, passing that value, calling that class, so it's like orchestrator, and making your UI more simpler. So again, ask yourself a question, is there some functionality which is needing aggregating many objects, or is your UI becoming very complicated? Because what happens, the best place where I see facade is that, for example, in a user interface, it's very much possible that the developer can the developer can expose all these three classes to the UI, and the UI is doing this part of place order. Okay, so rather than doing that, rather than creating the product object, displaying the details, the UI doing that directly, rather, it's creating the product object, displaying the details, calling the payment class, calling the invoice class, rather than the UI using these three objects and trying to achieve the functionality. It is better that you have a centralized facade system, which actually does that work for you. So you can say that facade is more about separating the UI a very practical definition that I will try to, or very practical implementation I can think about facade is if suppose you want to separate the orchestration part of the objects to achieve a functionality from the user interface, you can use facade. Any if you want to improve this video, any kind of doubts, you can mail me at shiv_queral@yahoo.com. You can also visit our website www.questpon.com for a lot of interview questions, a lot of video materials. We have tried to put as simplified as possible